The night nobody believed he could win, a nobody teacher walked into the ring against the greatest boxer alive, and what happened next broke every rule of boxing history. 50,000 screaming fans. A living legend. And one man who refused to read the script everyone had already written for him. The date was July 2nd, 2017. Suncorp Stadium, Brisbane, Australia. The air was thick, the crowd was electric, and everybody in that stadium already knew how this story was going to end. Manny Pacquiao, 11-time world champion, one of the greatest fighters who ever lived, was walking into that ring. Across from him stood a 29-year-old schoolteacher from Queensland. A guy who used to teach kids math. A guy with 18 professional fights. A guy who had never faced anyone remotely close to this level. His name was Jeff Horn. And everyone was about to be shocked out of their seats. Round 1 begins and immediately something feels different. Jeff Horn doesn't look scared. He doesn't look nervous. He walks straight at Pacquiao like a man who has been waiting his entire life for this exact moment. He throws right hands. He pushes. He muscles the legend around the ring. And Manny the icon, Manny the destroyer of champions, hasn't landed anything clean yet. The commentators are watching in quiet disbelief. Horn is rough. Horn is aggressive. Horn is doing everything the textbooks say you should never do against a speed demon like Pacquiao. He's walking straight forward, trading in the trenches, refusing to give ground. And it's working. By the end of round 1, Jeff Horn has done something almost nobody had done in years. He has won the round. Against Manny Pacquiao. Clear as daylight. But here's the thing about legends. They don't panic. Pacquiao comes out in round 2 calm, composed, those famous eyes reading everything. He's been here before. He's been down before. He's come back from places that would break ordinary men. He starts threading shots through Horn's guard. A left hand catches Jeff clean. Another one lands to the body. The crowd reacts every time Manny touches him. Yet Horn doesn't stop. He absorbs the shots. He fires back. He keeps coming forward. He keeps muscling the smaller man into the ropes and digging to the body with heavy, hard, unglamorous shots. This isn't beautiful boxing. This is a war. And then round 3 changes everything. A clash of heads opens a cut above Jeff Horn's right eye. Blood immediately begins to pour. The corner works on it between rounds, doing everything they can to stop the bleeding, but every time Horn engages, that cut starts seeping again. Now Horn is fighting with blood trickling into his vision and Manny Pacquiao smelling the opportunity. Most fighters slow down when they're cut. Most fighters start protecting themselves a little more carefully. Jeff Horn fights harder. By the middle rounds, something extraordinary is developing inside that stadium. The crowd, even the Australian crowd that came to cheer their local hero, is beginning to realize they are watching something genuinely historic. Horn is controlling the pace. He's busier than Pacquiao. He's landing to the body consistently, wearing down the champion's energy round by round. Manny throws that beautiful left hand, but Horn catches pieces of it on his arms. Manny tries to create angles with his legendary footwork, but Horn cuts him off. Every time Pacquiao looks for space, Horn is already there, crowding him, pressuring him, making the ring feel very small. The commentators keep waiting for Manny to shift gears. To find another level. To do what he has done to Oscar de la Hoya, to Ricky Hatton, to Miguel Cotto, to so many others. That moment where the speed goes from fast to frightening and the fight simply ends. That moment never comes. Instead, it's Horn who keeps landing the cleaner work. His uppercuts on the inside are sharp and accurate. Those clubbing right hands over the top are connecting. And those body shots, heavy, persistent, grinding, are adding up like compound interest, slowly draining Pacquiao's energy reserves. By the halfway point, unofficially, Jeff Horn is ahead. Then Manny Pacquiao decides to remind everyone exactly why he is a legend. Round 8. Pacquiao suddenly comes alive. Something switches in his eyes and he starts throwing in combinations, forcing Horn back, landing with more authority than he has shown all night. The crowd goes wild. Horn covers up, tries to survive, tries to fire back, but for the first time in the fight he genuinely looks like he's in trouble. Round 9 and Pacquiao absolutely erupts. He backs Horn into the ropes and unleashes. Left hands. Right hands. Combinations coming from angles Horn can't track. Jeff's legs start to betray him, that wobble that every boxing fan recognizes. That moment when a fighter's knees go soft and their survival instinct takes over completely. Horn grabs. Horn clinches. Horn does everything he can just to stay upright and hear the bell. In his corner, the conversation is brutal and honest. The trainer tells him, "Show me something in this round or I'm stopping the fight." Jeff Horn nods. He goes back out. What happens next is one of the most remarkable displays of recovery in boxing. Because by round 10, Horn's legs have somehow come back. Whether it's youth, whether it's adrenaline, whether it's sheer stubbornness, He starts moving again, starts landing again, starts making Manny work again. Pacquiao is confused. He just had this man hurt. He just had him on the edge of defeat. And now Horn is pressing forward again like nothing happened. This is the thing about Jeff Horn that nobody had fully understood before this night. He doesn't stay hurt. He has a recovery power that defies explanation. Every time Manny thinks he has broken him, Horn comes back. Every time the crowd thinks it's over, Horn answers. The fight rolls into rounds 11 and 12 with everything on the line and the scorecards impossibly close. The final round is everything a championship fight should be. Both men bleeding. Both men exhausted. Horn with that cut above his right eye that has been trickling blood for the better part of 9 rounds. Pacquiao with cuts in his hairline from the head clashes that have marked this war. 50,000 people on their feet and screaming so loud that the commentators can barely hear each other. They fight like they're both trying to win every single second. Horn throws heavy right hands. Pacquiao fires back with that left that has ended so many careers. They stand in the middle of the ring and trade shots that would knock out ordinary men. Either one of them goes down. Either one of them backs up. They fight until the final bell sounds and then they grab each other, 2 warriors acknowledging what they've just been through together. The crowd gives them a standing ovation that lasts and lasts. Then comes the wait. 3 judges. 3 scorecards. And a question that nobody in that stadium could answer with any certainty. Who won that fight? The first scorecard is read out. 117 to 111. The crowd erupts before the name is even announced. That score means one fighter dominated. That score means the judges weren't confused. 117 to 111 is not a close fight on the cards. That is a clear and decisive winner. The second judge, 115 to 113. The third judge, 115 to 113. All 3 scores going the same direction. Unanimous decision. And the new WBO welterweight champion of the world. Jeff Horn. The noise that comes out of Suncorp Stadium in that moment is something that people who were there describe as physical. You don't just hear it, you feel it in your chest. 50,000 Australians losing their minds simultaneously as their man, their schoolteacher, their underdog, their local boy, stands in the center of that ring with the championship belt being wrapped around his waist. Jeff Horn collapses to his knees. He covers his face. He cries. What made that night so extraordinary wasn't just that the underdog won. Underdogs win sometimes. That's sport. What made it historic was how Horn won. He didn't get lucky. He didn't sneak through on a gift decision. He went out there round after round and physically imposed his will on one of the best fighters the sport has ever produced. He outworked him. He out-hustled him. He refused every invitation to be intimidated, to slow down, to give an inch. Horn fought Pacquiao the same way he lived his life, as a schoolteacher who showed up every single day, put in the work that nobody sees, and trusted that preparation beats talent when talent doesn't work hard enough. Manny Pacquiao was generous in defeat. He acknowledged Horn's performance. He showed the class that has defined his long career. But even Manny couldn't fully explain what had happened to him that night. Somewhere in those 12 rounds, Jeff Horn had simply decided that losing wasn't an option, and he had made that decision stick. Boxing is full of upsets. The sport has a century of nights where the impossible happened, where the smaller man beat the bigger man, where the unknown fighter went home with the belt. But there are very few nights like Brisbane 2017. Very few nights where you can say that the better fighter, not the bigger name, not the richer history, not the more famous face, but the better fighter on that specific night walked out as champion. That night belonged to Jeff Horn, the schoolteacher from Queensland who looked at the greatest active fighter in the world and saw not a legend to be feared but simply another opponent to be beaten. And beat him he did, but the story doesn't end there. Because 3 months later, Jeff Horn got a phone call. Manny Pacquiao wanted a rematch. And what happened in that second fight completely changed how the world remembered the first one. Part 2 coming soon. Did Horn prove himself again? Or did the legend take back everything he lost? But the story doesn't end there. Because 3 months later, Jeff Horn got a phone call. Manny Pacquiao wanted a rematch. And the moment that news broke, the entire boxing world split into 2 camps overnight. One side said Manny had been robbed. That the judges got it wrong. That no schoolteacher from Queensland with 18 fights had any business beating an 11-time world champion on a genuine performance. They called it a hometown decision. They called it a disgrace. They said Pacquiao had clearly won the fight and that the rematch would prove it beyond any doubt. The other side said Jeff Horn had earned every single point on those scorecards. That he had outworked, out-hustled and out-muscled one of the greatest fighters alive. That the result was legitimate and that the rematch would simply confirm what Brisbane already knew. Jeff Horn read all of it. Every article. Every comment. Every criticism. And then he went back to the gym. Here is something important to understand about Jeff Horn that most people outside Australia never fully grasped. This was not a man who had been chasing fame his entire life. This was not someone who had sacrificed everything from childhood with a singular obsession about becoming world champion. Jeff Horn came to boxing relatively late compared to most elite fighters. He was a schoolteacher. He had a real life outside the sport. He had a wife, a family, responsibilities that had nothing to do with punching people. What drove him was something quieter, and in many ways more powerful than pure ambition. He simply could not stand the idea of not being the best version of himself. His trainer Glenn Rushton had identified something in Horn years earlier that most coaches would have missed. Underneath that calm, polite, reasonable exterior was a competitor of almost frightening intensity. Someone who, once he committed to something, would pursue it with a totality that bordered on obsession. The preparation for the first Pacquiao fight had been the most rigorous training camp of Horn's career. Rushton had pushed him to places he had never been before. The work was brutal, consistent, and unglamorous. There were no shortcuts. There was no moment where Horn decided he had done enough and eased off. And now, with the rematch signed, they did it all over again. The build-up to the second fight carried a different energy than the first. Before Brisbane, the narrative had been simple. Pacquiao was the legend. Horn was the challenger. The story wrote itself, and everyone assumed they knew the ending. Now the dynamic had shifted in complicated ways. Horn was the champion, but nobody was fully treating him like one. The criticism of the first fight's judging had been loud enough and persistent enough that a genuine cloud hung over his reign. Critics who had never questioned a Pacquiao victory in their lives were suddenly deeply concerned about the integrity of the scoring system. Promoters who had built their careers around Manny's drawing power were not subtle about which fighter they wanted to win. Horn felt all of this. He wasn't naive about the business side of boxing or about the way the sport's power structures worked. He understood that he was the inconvenient result. The upset that had disrupted carefully laid plans. The wrong man holding the belt according to a significant portion of the sports establishment. This motivated him in ways that even he found difficult to fully articulate. Because Jeff Horn had not just beaten Manny Pacquiao. He had beaten him clearly enough that 3 separate judges, scoring independently, had all given him the victory. You could argue about the margins. You could debate individual rounds. But unanimous decisions don't happen by accident. All 3 judges watched the same fight and came to the same conclusion. Horn had won. And he was going to prove it again. Training camp for the rematch revealed something that surprised even Rushton. Horn was better. The first camp had been about getting Horn to a level where he could compete with Pacquiao. The second camp was about turning him into a fighter who could dominate at world championship level. The experience of those 12 rounds in Brisbane had taught him things that no amount of sparring could replicate. He had felt Pacquiao's speed up close. He had absorbed those left hands and learned how they actually landed, how they felt, where they came from. He had been hurt in round 9, and he had survived. That knowledge, the knowledge that he could take Pacquiao's best shots and keep going, was worth more than months of training. His footwork improved. His timing sharpened. The body shots that had been so effective in the first fight became even more precise. Rushton worked specifically on Horn's defense, knowing that Pacquiao would come into the rematch with adjustments of his own, looking for the openings that Horn's style inevitably created. The cut above the right eye had been a concern after Brisbane. Head clashes were an unavoidable part of Horn's aggressive inside fighting style. They worked on head positioning, on the angles Horn used when closing distance, trying to reduce the risk without taking away the aggression that made him effective. By the time camp ended, Rushton was quietly confident. Not just that Horn could win again. That Horn could win convincingly. The rematch was set for April 2018 in Brisbane once again. Same city. Same crowd. And in many ways the same story, except that now the stakes were different in a way that went beyond the championship belt. This fight was about legitimacy. If Pacquiao won, the narrative would immediately shift. The first fight would be reframed as a fluke, a bad night for Manny, a gift from the judges. Horn's reign would be reduced to a footnote, an asterisk, a curiosity. He would be remembered as the man who held the belt for one fight before the real champion took it back. If Horn won again, none of that revisionism would be possible. You cannot explain away 2 victories. You cannot call it a hometown decision twice. A second win would permanently cement what happened in Brisbane as genuine. A real upset, a real changing of the guard, a real moment where the underdog proved he belonged. Jeff Horn understood all of this with complete clarity. The night of the rematch felt different from the opening seconds. Pacquiao came out faster, more aggressive. He had clearly decided that the passive approach of the first fight had cost him dearly, and he was not going to make the same mistake. He threw more punches in the opening 2 rounds than he had thrown in the first 4 rounds of the original fight. His footwork was sharper. He was using angles that had been absent in Brisbane, moving laterally, refusing to let Horn get his preferred inside position. For a moment, just a moment, it looked like the critics might have been right. It looked like Manny had found his answer. But Horn adjusted. This is what separated the rematch from a simple repeat of the first fight. Horn wasn't just executing the same game plan. He was reading what Pacquiao was doing and responding to it in real time. When Manny moved left, Horn cut the angle. When Pacquiao tried to use his speed to stay on the outside, Horn used his size and pressure to close the distance. When Manny loaded up on the left hand, Horn was already rolling with it, making the shots land on his shoulders and arms rather than clean on the chin. The body shots started landing again in round 3. Those heavy, thudding shots to Pacquiao's midsection that had done so much damage in Brisbane. Manny visibly felt them. His movements slowed slightly. His breathing changed. Anyone who has been hit hard to the body in a boxing match knows that those shots accumulate in a way that head shots don't. You can shake off a punch to the chin. A deep body shot lives with you for the rest of the fight, tightening your breathing, stealing your legs, making every subsequent effort cost just a little bit more. Horn was making Manny pay the same toll he had paid in Brisbane. By the middle rounds of the rematch, something remarkable was happening. Horn was not just winning, he was winning more clearly than he had in the first fight. The aggressive opening from Pacquiao had faded. The speed that had threatened to turn the rematch into a Manny showcase had been neutralized by Horn's relentless pressure and intelligent adjustment. And now Horn was doing what he had done in Brisbane, occupying Pacquiao's space, forcing him to deal with a bigger, stronger, more physical fighter than Manny had faced in years. Pacquiao had a few good rounds. He always did. You don't fight 60 professional fights and become an 11-time world champion without having the ability to find your way back into a contest. There were moments when that left hand snapped Horn's head back and the crowd held its breath. There were moments when Manny's feet suddenly found their rhythm, and he moved around the ring with the grace that had made him one of the most beautiful boxers of his generation. But those moments were increasingly isolated, increasingly brief. Horn kept coming forward. Horn kept landing to the body. Horn kept making Manny work for everything while taking away the space and angles that Manny needed to be at his most dangerous. The championship rounds of the rematch lacked the pure drama of Brisbane. And in a strange way, that was the most powerful statement Horn could make. In Brisbane, the final 3 rounds had been a desperate, bloody, thrilling survival exercise. Horn had been hurt badly, had dug into reserves he didn't know he had willed himself through moments that should have ended the fight. In the rematch, the final rounds were controlled. Horn was tired. He was always going to be tired. 12 rounds of elite boxing at world championship level does that to every human body. But he wasn't desperate. He wasn't surviving. He was competing, landing, scoring, maintaining the pressure that had defined his performance all night. When the final bell sounded, Horn raised his hands. Not with the desperate relief of Brisbane. Not with the disbelief of a man who had just done something he wasn't sure was possible. With certainty. He knew he had won. He had known it for several rounds. And this time, when the scorecards were read, nobody was going to be able to call it a hometown decision. The judges confirmed what everyone watching had seen. Unanimous decision. Jeff Horn. The champion retained his belt. The schoolteacher from Queensland had done it twice. Back-to-back victories over Manny Pacquiao, one of the most celebrated fighters in the history of the sport. The crowd in Brisbane celebrated in the way that only a crowd watching their own person achieve something genuinely historic can celebrate. But even the international press, much of which had been skeptical after the first fight, had to acknowledge what they had witnessed. This was not a fluke. This was not a gift. Jeff Horn was a legitimate world champion. In the weeks that followed, something shifted in the way the boxing world talked about Jeff Horn. The narrative of the schoolteacher underdog began to give way to something more complicated and more accurate. People started going back and watching the first fight again with fresh eyes, seeing things they had dismissed or overlooked in their rush to defend Pacquiao's legacy. The body shots. The ring generalship. The way Horn had controlled distance and pace for long stretches of the fight. They started to see what those three judges had seen on the night. And they started to understand that what had happened in Brisbane wasn't luck or geography or sympathetic scoring. It was the result of a man who had prepared better, adapted better, and competed better than his famous opponent on the night that mattered most. Jeff Horn's story carries something that goes beyond boxing. Because most of us are not prodigies. Most of us don't have obvious natural gifts that set us apart from everyone around us. Most of us look at the Manny Pacquiaos of our own fields, the naturals, the gifted, the celebrated, the ones who have been winning since before we even started, and we tell ourselves quietly that the gap is too large, that the ceiling is too high, that some people are simply born for greatness, and we are not among them. Horn grew up as a talented athlete, but nobody was predicting world championships for him. Nobody was talking about him as a future great. He came to elite boxing late, learned his craft methodically, lost fights along the way, dealt with the doubts that every fighter who isn't an obvious prodigy has to deal with. He won anyway. Not by becoming something he wasn't. Not by discovering some hidden natural gift that had been waiting inside him all along. But by working with extraordinary discipline toward a specific goal and refusing to let anyone else's assessment of his ceiling become his own. Glenn Rushton saw something in Jeff Horn that Horn himself took years to fully believe. And part of what makes their story so compelling is that it's about a coach and an athlete growing together, pushing each other, building something that neither of them could have built alone. The question that people still ask about the Horn vs. Pacquiao saga is whether Manny was already in decline by the time Brisbane happened. Whether a younger Pacquiao, the destroyer who had dismantled the welterweight division in his prime, would have handled Horn differently. It's a fair question. Pacquiao was 38 years old in Brisbane. He had been a professional boxer for over 20 years. The miles on that body were considerable, and the slowing that comes with age in elite sports is real and inevitable regardless of how extraordinary the athlete. But here is the counter-argument that Horn's supporters make, and it's a strong one. Pacquiao at 38 was still Pacquiao. He had still beaten Jesse Vargas not long before Brisbane, still shown elite-level skills, still possessed the speed and power that had defined him throughout his career. You don't get to dismiss a win over a fighter of that quality simply because he's no longer at his absolute peak. Every fighter ages. The question is who you beat and whether you beat them fairly. Horn beat Pacquiao fairly. Twice.